Travel all over the countryside, ask the Leylands, ask the Leylands. Travel all over the countryside, ask the Leyland brothers. Whatever it is that you want to see, ask the Leylands, ask the Leylands. No matter whatever that happens to be, ask the Leyland brothers. Come on, me in and join in the fun. Travel all over Australia. Ask the Leyland, ask the Leyland, ask the Leyland brothers.
This week we have two totally different stories for you. Where are we going first, Mal?
Well, our first story comes from Tasmania, from a small town of Glen Huon. There we meet two interesting people who carve apples into very interesting little doll's heads. And then where do we go to, Mike?
We go across to the North Island of New Zealand, up here to the Bay of Islands. First we have a look at the history of New Zealand, and in the second part of our story we look at the Bay of Islands as it is today and its scenic beauty.
Well, I suppose Tasmania is probably best known throughout Australia for its apples. The Apple Isle, of course, it's known as. And we've come to Tasmania to take a look at apples, but in a most unusual way, thanks to this letter, which we received from Miss Lynn Albert from Wheeler Heights in New South Wales. And she writes to say, "Could you please show me the art of making dolls from apples? I have recently read a short article on this craft and would like to know more about it." Well, the people who make the dolls, or to be more precise, dolls' heads, are Mr. and Mrs. Clark. And Mr. and Mrs. Clark live in Glen Huon, and that's where we are, in the heart of apple country. Let's go now and meet Frank and Betty Clark and find out just how they do create dolls from the humble apple.
The Clarks, living in a quiet back street of Glen Huon in a state of semi-retirement, found a fascination in carving apples into dolls' heads. They turned out so well that they now find hardly a day goes by without someone paying them a visit just to see or buy a sample of their handicraft. They make everyone welcome, and in the homely atmosphere of their dining room are only too willing to show just how it's done. Having first studied the apple to take advantage of its natural shape, Frank first cuts fine grooves into the skin to form the hair. Right from the outset, Frank makes up his mind if it's going to turn out a man or a woman, and works quickly to create the facial features with the utmost detail. He uses simple carving tools designed for softwood carving, but stresses that the acid in the apple juice soon dulls the keen edge on the knives, and they must be sharpened quite frequently. To prevent the apples from browning, he periodically dips them into a container of lemon juice. Whilst living in Canada years ago, Frank and Betty Clark once saw dolls made with apples that had been carved by the native Indians, but they would not reveal the secret of the drying process, and it was only after a great deal of research and tireless experimentation that the Clarks have perfected the technique of drying. With the face complete, Frank adds finishing touches by replacing sections of finely cut apple skin to represent eyebrows, eyes and whiskers. They adhere firmly to the apple as it dries. Even facial colouring comes from lemon juice stained by red pigment from the apple skin. The doll's head is complete with the addition of a pyramid-shaped base fashioned from Huon pine. After a week of drying, it will shrink and dry hard to look like the finished products gazing down on the work table. Frank's drying technique is simple enough, but it has taken a lot of research to discover that the ideal drying temperature seems to be about 38 degrees.
All different stages, are they?
Oh yes, they are. This is the hot end here. These are the freshly carved apples at this end, and tomorrow I shall take some out of this other end, which are already dried out, and then move them along.
Are they hard, are they?
Oh, these are very hard. It's just give it a little squeeze. Seems like a...
Oh, it is.
You might also compare the weight. Compare the weight.
I noticed they were heavy.
Try the two. The same apple to start with.
Same apple?
Yeah.
What sort of a heater is it?
It's an ordinary household space heater, the electric heater, and I have the cover on so that we don't get too much heat come up in the room. I do have little chimneys that I can put on the top of this this insulated cover, so that, yes, you can feel the heat coming out. Yes, yes. In fact, you can smell a very nice smell of apple juice coming out of that end.
Oh,
And it's a bit more like burnt apples at this end.
yeah, just like that.
Betty Clark also carves apples, but she uses a totally different technique and creates a different type of finished doll's head.
Long nose, but some people don't. Now it's just the eyes and the mouth, and that will be ready.
She makes no attempt at fine detail, but instead carves a rough head in a matter of a few minutes.
You don't do too much detail because it changes with it goes smaller when it's drying. A few lines. Now these go over here.
These apples are dried slowly at room temperature by suspending them on lengths of cotton.
How long are they there for?
Oh, they have to dry about a month now, and they go smaller and smaller to where they were looking at just now.
Once dry, Betty must take a lot of time decorating and colouring the dried heads, whereas Frank's heads are complete when dried and contain no
To go in. And then afterwards, this will go on the lady, like this, little scarf.
Put back.
When completely dressed, Betty's dolls are just as attractive as her husband's, but they both have their own unique appeal. They're an instant success with 18-month-old Carmen, and for most adults for that matter. When the apples are in season, the Clarks work quietly in Glen Huon, literally carving a reputation for themselves with their unique apple dolls.
We have a fascinating letter from Mr. Bernard Waslin of West Sunshine in Victoria, who would like to see some of the history of New Zealand. He writes, "We have just arrived back from spending 4 weeks in the North Island. In the far north of the island there is lots of history, particularly in the Bay of Islands. There is a small township where the first Europeans settled in the early 1800s, and is buried the first white woman to be born in New Zealand. Not far away is the Hole in the Rock, where boats take visitors through the hole near the big game fishing grounds. Treaty House, where the Treaty of Waitangi was signed by Britain and the Maori leaders in 1840. And Kerry Kerry is the site of the oldest European dwelling and stone store in New Zealand. We're going to begin at the beginning and have a look at a pre-European Maori village here at the historic township of Kerry Kerry." Inside the walled village's main gate is the chief's enclosure with the chief's house. The Maori chief's house was always the best built in the village, as it had to be large enough for use as a meeting house. The Maoris were warlike cannibals and often ate their dead enemies during celebrations. The This primitive meat safe was used only for delicacies, like children's fingers, for the chief and his eldest son. Only chief's sons were allowed to have their own enclosure within the walled village. The Maoris lived a communal existence, which was a great advantage in times of war. Communal food storage places were centrally located in the village. They grew crops like kumaras, a sweet potato, to supplement their diet. This roundhouse is the oldest style of Maori dwelling, but there were still a few around when Captain Cook visited the Bay of Islands. Captain Cook sailed his ship Endeavour into a large bay in November 1769. Noting the number of islands in the bay, he named it Bay of Islands. Cook went ashore with a small party of men. They visited several villages and found the Maoris friendly. When they left at the end of a week, a flotilla of Maori canoes farewelled them. The first settlement in New Zealand was here at Russell in the Bay of Islands. It came about in the 1800s when whalers and sealers visited this area to collect water and supplies. Grog shops were set up along the waterfront, up to 30 they say, and it became known as the hellhole of the Pacific because this was before there was any authority in the area. After the whalers came to Russell, the missionaries followed, led by the Reverend Samuel Marsden in 1814. New Zealand's oldest wooden European building is Kemp House at Kerikeri in the Bay of Islands. Erected from pit sawn timber in 1822 by the Reverend John Butler. The kauri and native totra is still in excellent condition, only the shingle roof has been replaced by iron. Nearby is the Old Stone Store, New Zealand's oldest stone building. This was erected by missionaries in 1833 to protect the stores from marauding Maori tribes. Although built to withstand a siege, the store was never needed for that purpose. Perhaps New Zealand's most famous place is the Waitangi Treaty House, on the shores of the Bay of Islands. Here in 1840, the Treaty of Waitangi was signed by 45 Maori chiefs and representatives of the Queen of England, making New Zealand part of the British Empire. Law had come to the land, or had it? After the signing of the Waitangi Treaty in 1840, the British erected a flagstaff here on the hill above the town of Russell. In the next 5 years, the flagstaff was cut down 4 times by the Maoris because they saw it as a symbol of British authority. In 1857, the Maoris voluntarily re-erected the flagstaff as a symbol of peace. At the fourth cutting down of the flagpole, the Maoris attacked and sacked the town of Russell as a diversion for the men cutting down the flagpole. After the pole was re-erected by the Maoris, peace came to the Bay of Islands. Today, Russell is a quiet, restful spot, with only the old hazard cannon used in the fight against the Maoris to remind us of Russell's turbulent past. New Zealand's Bay of Islands is steeped in history. We will be back after this break to find out what it's like today. In 1886, A.E. Fuller started to run boats around the isolated areas of the Bay of Islands to collect cream from the farmers. The cream trip, as it became known, was very popular with visitors to the area as a unique way to see the Bay of Islands. And today, you can still take the cream trip. When Mr. Fuller started taking passengers on his 32-foot cutter, he would have had no idea how popular the cream trip would become. Thousands of people each year set off from Paihia on one of Fuller's cruises around the Bay of Islands. Fuller's put a boat and skipper at our disposal for the day so that we could show some of the highlights of the different cruises around the bay. The people who live on the islands in the bay rely on Fuller's boats to deliver their stores and mail. The Waikeri is one of Fuller's fastest boats. It does the longest run to Cape Brett and back, taking 3.5 hours for the round trip. A sight that is fairly common on the Bay of Islands is schools of wild porpoises swimming and playing around the boats. Carrie and Sandy could barely believe their eyes to see such wild creatures come so close to them in the boat. A short distance ahead, we see Percy Island with its famous hole in the rock. Even with a heavy swell running, the Waikari makes its usual trip through the hole, with the sound of excited passengers echoing off the rocks. The run through the famous hole in the rock is an experience not quickly forgotten. The skipper of our boat takes us to see a gannet rookery on a huge rock that juts out of the sea a few kilometres from Cape Brett. The birds in the water indicate a school of pilchards. The pilchards are jumping about as bigger fish dive into the school to snatch a mouthful. Pat soon takes advantage and has one hooked on a lure in no time.
Can you lift that house, my girl? Carve? Carve. I think in Australia you call them sea salmon.
Very pleased with our catch, we head on to Cape Brett Lighthouse to rendezvous with the Waikari. The Waikari makes a daily stop here to deliver supplies to the isolated families that man the Cape Brett Lighthouse. The assistant lighthouse keeper, Rod Allen, collects the supplies and sends some mail back with the crew. Pat and I accompany Rod ashore to film the lighthouse. The lady of the house looks forward to the daily fuller's boat. It means a regular supply of fresh fruit and groceries. With this daily visit, life on the lighthouse doesn't seem so isolated. With the principal lighthouse keeper on holidays, Rod has a relieving keeper to help with the routine maintenance work. Cape Brett Lighthouse was prefabricated in cast iron and steel and transported here by ship to be assembled in 1910. Rod has come to check the automatic alarm system in the light.
When the lens is rotating, this bath of mercury here spins around and centrifugal force holds that mercury at the end here. Now, if for some reason the lens stops rotating, the mercury rolls down into the position it's in now, this starts an alarm ringing down in the house, and we know that the lens rotation has stopped and it needs to be fixed.
Cape Brett Light has been a welcome sight to many a ship on a stormy night. The Bay of Islands has some extremely rugged coastline, made safer by this light, which is visible for 50 kilometres. The ships that ply the rugged New Zealand coast owe a lot to the dedicated men and their families who man these isolated lighthouses. The Bay of Islands is famous for its big game fishing grounds, and in the middle of the bay is a large island called Urupupuka. Here on the island, Otaheite Bay, Zane Grey, the famous American Western author, had a big game fishing camp in the 1920s. It was largely Zane Grey who publicised the sport internationally and started big game fishing in this area. Now the bay is popular enough to have international game fishing championships held here. The cream trip makes a lunch stop here at Zane Grey's Old Jetty. It gives the passengers a chance to stretch their legs and try something different. When you reach Otahay Bay, another interesting way to see the Bay of Islands is to go up in the Grumman Goose, operated by CB Air.
You want to go for it now?
Launch passengers can get to see the beautiful Bay of Islands from another angle by taking a flight-seeing trip in one of the 2 wartime amphibians that CB Air operates daily over the bay. The bay is studded with over 150 islands. It is a drowned river system, an area where the sea has invaded and drowned a number of river valleys. Motorua Island was the site of a French shore base in 1771. 3 years after Cook visited the Bay of Islands, the French navigator, Marin Dufresne, buried a bottle bearing the arms of France and containing a document claiming the country for France. That bottle still lies buried here somewhere, awaiting discovery. As we said in the introduction, the Bay of Islands in the Northland province of New Zealand is an area full of history and with beautiful scenery around every corner. It is no wonder that thousands of visitors flock here for the swimming, fishing, or just plain looking.
Travel all over the countryside, ask the Leylands, ask the Leylands. Travel all over the countryside, ask the Leyland brothers. Whatever it is that you want to see, ask the Leylands, ask the Leylands. No matter whatever that happens to be, ask the Leyland brothers.